When leaders waffle on their public statements, who are we to believe? And why does that matter? In today's program, we'll be discussing essentially three articles in the Lanyap dated for yesterday, January the 28th, 2026. The first article we're going to talk about is the revenue generator involving the town of Mount Vernon and certainly the police chief and his termination. The second article in the Lanyap we'll be discussing is the non-disclosure agreements involving leaders and subordinates at the local coastal college in Bay Minette. And then, of course, the third thing is the one that I've talked about twice on two previous podcasts, was the porn letter warnings that were sent certainly to some people in Mobile County from the Mobile County Sheriff's Office. Listen, while these things are important, first and foremost, we can talk about the money that's being spent with litigation, the lawyers, and certainly in settlements, right? And some of those things certainly are appropriate in today's complex world. But the truth is a lot of these issues, let's just talk about the Mount Vernon issue. According to this chief, and again, it's his side of the story, this podcast, let me be very clear, is not taking one side over the other. We don't even have all the information. The only thing we're discussing today is the articles that were in the Lanyap dated for yesterday, the 28th of January, 2026, and just kind of looking at it from a leadership's perspective. And if you take each and every one of these that we'll discuss, there's a leadership problem. And the leadership is not defined by the subordinate. It has to be defined by those that are in charge, be it the governor, the mayor, whoever it may be. And in this particular case, the chief is subordinate to the administration and to the mayor of the town of Mount Vernon. And so there seems to be some discrepancy, and in that discrepancy is whether or not the police chief was acting as a police chief in a part-time role or even a full-time role, and what differentiated that between the chief's role and certainly his role as a police officer. And then, of course, making the allegation, I believe, that the administration somehow or another wanted him to target or profile white drivers coming, through their town, I guess, to generate some sort of revenue. And of course, the administration and the legal representation for the town of Mount Vernon adamantly denies it. We won't know until down the road. And then, of course, the second incident, and we'll talk a little bit about the non-disclosure agreements involving leaders and certainly professors or adjunct instructors, subordinates at Coastal College in Bay Minette, and these things are important. Why? Well, let's just talk about those two real quick and why they matter. They matter because in many of these cases here, there's real, there doesn't seem to be a defining line of what appropriate actions are by leaders and what the subordinates are supposed to be doing in the way of reporting inappropriate behavior or reporting what may be construed as unlawful or improper conduct. And so it really boils down to what I always say is that while the subordinate always dictates the relationship with the boss, and I wholeheartedly believe that, I believe that the subordinate should always do exactly what the boss asks them to do. It doesn't matter if it's the public sector or the private sector. And if the boss asks you and wants you to do something, and it's especially within the scope of your job, then you certainly need to do it. Then that brings into question, well, what if it's not in the scope? Well, I still believe that good employees always go above and beyond to ensure that the job is done, whether it's the private or the public sector. The problem that I've always taken is that while the subordinate dictates the relationship in many regards to being subservient to the boss, the subordinate should always do what they're supposed to do so long as the request is not unlawful conduct or criminal or unethical or improper. And improper is overlooking criminal behavior, certainly corruption. Those things are important. There should be an avenue to be able to report that kind of information to the boss or through certain channels to be able to correct that behavior. But more importantly, then you take the issue, with the non-disclosure agreements. I think that it appears to be somewhere around $300,000. And I mean, the article's not very clear, but I do think that some of that's probably going to be legal fees. Probably a large portion of it's going to be legal fees. But that brings us really to the point about those two topics is the people that are being enriched off of these are certainly not the people bringing the complaints or the suits. And it certainly isn't the administration that's being sued, but it's the taxpayer dollars that are being used to enrich these attorneys and these firms. And listen, thankfully we have attorneys, right? That is what the courts are for, is to remedy problems. But it just seems like today more than ever that a lot of these firms across the spectrum, they're being enriched. A lot of these cases probably could be resolved without having to go on for years. And all that really does is it pays the attorney and the firm and gives them the ability to bill a lot of money to the taxpayer when they could probably try to resolve a lot of these cases on the onset. Now, they're not going to get paid a lot of money, and there's no real monetary benefit from them to do so. But I do think that the mayors and the leaders of these municipalities, certainly these government operations, should be able to talk with the lawyers and say, listen, let's try to remedy this thing the best we can. And I think that is appropriate. But we should also do our part and make sure that we're doing our due diligence, with that agency that, we've been privileged to serve at. And I think those things are important. But really what I want to talk with you a little bit about today are the porn letters regarding the sheriff's office. And that article was written in the Lanyap as well. But I really want to expand on some of the porn letters that were talked about. When reading this article, there is a lot left unanswered. And the writer, I suppose, did not press some of the previous public statements made by the sheriff's office, the sheriff, or whoever made the comments, whether it was the sheriff or any of his public information personnel. But I think we ought to just go through the article a little bit, because if you don't know, then you're kind of questioning, okay, well, maybe that doesn't make sense. Maybe it does. Listen, the spokesperson for the sheriff's office in this case is Lori Miles, and she states in part there were two types of letters essentially explaining my thoughts on the last two podcasts about this topic and why there were essentially two letters. And so you heard it here first at the podcast, and I don't have all the information. However, after 30 years of service, using deductive reasoning, it simply works. And I still don't have all the inside information. But it just simply made sense why the letters would be a matter of practice. Miles went on to say that the similar type letters are used with the Alabama Law Enforcement Association or state police, and certainly the ICAC units around the country. And I stipulated that those letters had to be common practice. Otherwise, these investigators did not act on their own accord, developing and sending out these letters to people in the community. Miles went on to state that in one letter that the video was certainly unclear and that no search warrant would have been issued due to the poor video quality and not being able to identify the two people that were in the video. What she failed to say is that no investigation was conducted in that case. So her argument was predicated on the lack of evidence based on one singular piece that she referred to as the video. I would argue that an investigation would have still been warranted to gain further probable cause to determine if minors were involved or not. One piece of evidence doesn't determine the solvability of a case. So my question still remains, are there children in that home? And do we know if the child or the children are safe? And it doesn't seem like the writer in this particular article even asked that question. Maybe they don't want to ask the question. Maybe they're not watching the podcast. But these are relevant questions and concerns to determine whether or not an investigation should have been warranted to determine if children were in the home and if they were safe. Listen, Miles then goes on to clarify the sheriff's comments on 106.5 News Talk Radio, the Sean Sullivan Show, that he was referring or speaking to the agency's approval process of those letters. I respectfully disagree. He was not aware such letters were sent or that they were even common practice. Listen, I get it. Some of you will say, well, he didn't know and that was a mistake, Paul. And yes, it was a mistake, and I agree that leaders and people do make mistakes. However, even the arguments from Miles do not answer the question as to why the letters are sent out if there are children, locally especially, involved. And if we know there appears to be two minors in a video involved in what appeared to be sexual activity, why would we not conduct an investigation, irrespective as to whether the video could be used or not used, especially if you've identified the address, the IP address, the phone device, whatever the case may be? Listen, all I'm simply saying is a visual inspection of the home and general questions of occupants would have at least answered some of the questions that I've previously proposed in the first two podcasts. Listen, Miles went on and suggested this is common practice, or stated it's common practice, and that the practice would not change. Now, you think of this, and I really want you to think clear on this. The sheriff's office sends a letter accusing essentially someone in that residence of committing child sexual abuse, or that person was involved in child pornography. Now, I want you to think of the implications to one's reputation. You're accused, if you received that letter, one of society's worst crimes without specifically being stated what the offense was that was committed. But you were warned to stop. Consider this. The letter falls out of the mailbox, the neighbor gets the letter, and it becomes public. Now your reputation has been marred because a letter was sent out essentially accusing you of some sort of child sex crime. Let's just consider another hypothetical or scenario. You're the only man who lives in the home. Your wife gets the letter. Can you imagine the consequence? And rightfully so. In my opinion, this is a failure. What about the Wi-Fi settings? Are the password protected, or the Wi-Fi setting passwords protected, or is the Wi-Fi open? Could the neighbor have access to your Wi-Fi? I'm simply saying that the professional law enforcement agency in today's world should understand the implications of making false allegations without proof. You either have the evidence or you don't, and if you don't, it is your responsibility to go out to determine if a crime has been committed, especially with children. I would suggest that if no evidence was available other than the tip, at a minimum, the investigator should do a general investigation to determine if children are in the home, if DHR complaints had been made or determined possibly through the school system, if there were social issues involving the child or children that may live in the home that go to the school. There are other things that can be done to determine if such crime had happened or an investigation is warranted. If not, then document such general investigation and close the case, but at least you have something on file. Listen, Miles was correct when she confirmed my previous statements that these letters were common practice. She only gave half-hearted answers as to why. If the letters continued, I would simply make a suggestion to the sheriff's office to at least send the letters certified mail. To not do so opens the sheriff's office to the county and the sheriff's office to litigation, which would ultimately be atrocious if the complaint on the person in the letter was indeed guilty of the offense but not charged. My friends, listen, leadership really does matter. The leader doesn't know everything. However, he or she should always surround themselves with the best competent people in the business to keep him or her informed, especially on these serious matters. To make public statements without regard for the truth and facts, well, they're careless. Simply giving the public an answer with the mindset that you can walk back that answer anytime without consequence, well, I'm just going to be frank with you. I believe that's wrong, and it's not being authentic. And the truth is, this scenario alone could be construed as misfeasance, malfeasance, or even nonfeasance. We simply don't know because we still don't have all of the answers. Listen, I do not say these things to be unkind at all. It's just my opinions and perspective of having been a law enforcement officer for 30 years and certainly leading, arguably, the second largest city in the state of Alabama as the police chief. Let me simply say this. I know a lot of people, and I've had a few people say, well, listen, the program was good. But it seems like you're being really direct. Well, let me say this. There are a lot of leaders in Mobile County that does not want a guy like me holding that position or that office. Why? Because it comes with such authority, mandated constitutional authority, and wields a lot of power in the state of Alabama. Corrupt politicians that are not doing the things they need to be doing, they fear a guy like me holding that office. That could explain why a lot of the old Mobile money, power, influence, and the people have gotten behind Birch. Oh, some of you will say, well, yeah, you just couldn't win over their influence. Well, I didn't want to win over their influence. I believe in serving people. I believe that the oath of office still stands 30 years later after I took that office, that I would do the right thing at all costs because the people demand it. They deserve it. My friends, let me simply say this. While some of the content may be very direct, these are a matter of public statements by officials. These are a matter of philosophies of leadership. You don't get this kind of content with most political candidates. You don't get this kind of content in many regards, even with elected officials. Why? Because once it is recorded and released, you have information that says, Brian, you went back on your philosophy. You went back on your leadership principles and how you lead. And I'm doing this because, well, ultimately it's my responsibility to show you, the voting public, how I can do the job better. I believe in character. I believe in integrity. And I'm certainly asking for your vote for Mobile County Sheriff's Office, May 19th, 2026. My friends, thank you again for watching the program. The next program, we are going to talk a little bit more about the budget. We have talked about the budget and how the budget has exceeded some 85% over the last 4 years. But some people have reached out to me and they've said, well, Paul, listen, man, that's alarming that the sheriff's office is increased some 86%, the tune of $50 million over 4 years. What proof do you have? Well, we're going to talk about that on the next episode, because remember this, Prime Time never comes and makes allegations or statements that he or she cannot prove. And if I can, I simply will always say, hey, this is what my position, just like these letters, these porn letters, if you will, this is my position on it, not knowing all the information. And I think that's important. That's transparency. That's coming at you with perspectives, but it's also coming with you with truths. And so maybe on the next program, we'll talk more about that budget increase, and maybe it will open the door for us, or at least some of those in the public, to ask questions, maybe to the county commission. At least how many times has the sheriff came and to the county commission and said, look, we're out of money. We need more money. How many executive sessions have been had? Well, we simply don't know at this point, but we do have the budget information from the Mobile County Commission that shows just how much money has been sent and allocated to the Mobile County Sheriff's Office. Remember, my friends, we'll see you again on the next program, Lord willing, and the creek don't rise. God bless.